That.
Yeah, no worries. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we'll be speaking to you about how you can engage with your CALD audiences in a more creative and engaging way. This forum is called It's Not What You Say, It's How You Say It. And yeah, we're hoping you learn something new today and that you enjoy your experience. I just want to begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather today. I want to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. If we're just going to move on to the next slide. This is just a brief agenda about the stuff we'll be speaking about today. We'll start off with a small introduction, and then we'll launch straight into some video strategies that you can use with some examples of work that we've done in the past. We'll also be providing some interesting new rules that you can use to help shape your future communications as well. And to finish the session off, we'll be holding a Q&A with Dr. Erica Gonzalez Garcia and with a community leader, Sadia Ali. Just on the side over there, sorry, Steph, if we could just go back, are some learning outcomes that we hope you achieve today as well. Just to introduce the presenters here today, we have our director, Eva Hussein. We have the president of OZIT, Dr. Erica Gonzalez. We have our community leader, Sadia Ali, our language services manager, Marcus Mazzocchi, and myself, who is the relationships and growth coordinator at Polaron Language Services. Just to kick things off, I'll be handing things over to our director, Eva Hussein, who's going to give us an interesting anecdote that's previously happened to her.
Thanks, Hasara. So this is my favorite topic in the world: translations, communications, engaging people. And I think, firstly, I wanted to thank the organizers of the Global Learning Festival for having us. I also wanted to say that we do want to make the session interactive. So if you want to put any comments in the chat box, you can, and we encourage you to do so. But what are you seeing on the screen? What you're seeing on the screen is a letter I received, I want to say about 10 years ago, but I've kept it. It's not a love letter, although I don't know, because it's in Arabic, right? So this letter I received from Visa cards, so people that, you know, encourage you to get a credit card. And as you can see, they are encouraging me to apply. And of course, very kindly, they translated this for me into Arabic. There's only one problem. Who knows what the problem might be? I've already kind of given it away. So the problem is that I don't speak Arabic. I don't read Arabic. My surname kind of indicates something Middle Eastern, but they couldn't be more wrong. And when I received it, and if I could get you to go to the next slide, because they've printed it on beautiful paper, and they've put a lot of care into, you know, encouraging me to apply for the visa business in Arabic. So when I received it, I'm like, hold on a second, I don't speak this language. I want to call them and tell them to you know, to fix this, because it's just wrong what they did. And you know, I sort of imagined a room full of marketers thinking, you know, how do we reach this, you know, people that speak languages other than English in Australia? Let's translate it. But how do we know what languages they speak? Let's look at their surname. And basically that's what they did. But when I wanted to contact them, of course, there was no way of doing so, because there's no phone number, there's no addresses, nothing. So I use this example in showing you what not to do, basically, when you want to engage communities, and you know, not to make certain assumptions. Things like surnames don't indicate what language you speak. And just to be a bit careful, I guess, in what we assume around people and what you spend your money on, because this is another thing that's very dear to my heart, and how much money we spend on translation. So this is not how to do it. This is definitely one way of making yourself look a bit silly. And I've shown this example in many different contexts. So I don't know if the Visa card people got the message yet, but I can't call them. So, I won't know whether they've realized the error of their ways or not. So this is just like a quick, I guess, icebreaker to show you how, with the best of intentions, you can actually get your communication wrong. And today we're going to be talking about good practice examples and give you lots of ideas of how to do communication with diverse or multicultural audience as well. Over, back to you, Hasara. Thank you.
No stress. Thank you for that wonderful anecdote, Eva. I think it's a really great way of showing the real world consequences of not planning things ahead of time. Just to move on from that example, we're going to have Marcus Mazzocchi speaking a bit about the creative new ways you could use existing channels and YouTube and social media in order to communicate with your CALD audiences. Over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Hasara. So I'll just talk a little bit about audiovisual translations, channels for dissemination of information, and just briefly go over a case study that we had. So audiovisual translations, and by that I just mean videos with voiceover and subtitles and captions. They're a great way to ensure that your resources are accessible, and a great way to disseminate information, especially when we're talking about complex topics. So if you look at the statistics, people are spending more and more time online, and video consumption has increased exponentially over the years. By 2022, online videos will make up more than 82% of all consumer internet traffic. So these are, that's a big number, and it's something that we should consider, and that you could consider when choosing a way to disseminate your resources and information online. So YouTube at the moment is one of the most popular video sharing platforms, although there are other platforms as well. And it's just a great platform to share resources, and they provide you with great metrics such as view counts, subscriber counts, and other analytics. So one example, we worked with Family Planning Victoria on a project that they had. We did the voiceover and subtitles for several of their videos that were related to sexual health. So in this case, we, one of the many challenges that we had, we were working with sensitive information that had a lot of stigma surrounding commonly used terms for sexual health. So we worked together with translators and ethno-specific communities, organizations, and the client, and we came up with terms that would be suitable and culturally appropriate for each demographic. So we translated these videos into many languages, Chinese, Arabic, and so forth. And we decided that, the best way to share these videos were going to be that we put them on YouTube. So the client put them on YouTube. And this was a great way to also ascertain the demographics that were viewing the content. For example, the Arabic had a very high view count compared to other languages. So when you think about channels of dissemination and ways to present resources, video is a great way, and YouTube is a great way to disseminate these resources. So we go on to the next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about easy English and plain English. These are just basically, we can summarize this as two methods of engaging local communities. So plain English is basically just a writing style that readers can easily understand. It just combines like clear and concise expressions, simple sentence structure, and a design that is easy to navigate when we're talking about complex resources. Easy English is very similar to plain English, and it's just a way of writing for people who have problems reading and understanding written words. And it just includes basically just essential information, very short paragraphs. It uses colors and images, and explain difficult words in the glossary. So basically, we use plain and easy English as just methods to engage with the local communities, especially when we understand that not everyone is literate in their native language. So these are just great ways to disseminate this information in a easy way to understand for everyone. Okay, next one.
I think I'm going to take over from here.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Marcus. I'll just be speaking about a bit more of the generic rules that you can use when you're thinking about your next communications campaign or ways to engage with your audiences. The first rule here that I'll be speaking about is the 80-20 rule, which was developed to highlight opportunities to help increase the cultural relevance of your translation or your resource in general. It's supposed to guide you and help you understand which parts of your original message needs to be adapted to suit the profile of your target audience. The thing is, people are more likely to engage with resources that feel genuinely relevant to them. And whilst it's important to maintain the key messages that you're trying to communicate, I think it's also important to maybe change up a bit of the secondary characteristics so that you can make your resource a bit more community specific and a bit more engaging. For example, if you were to develop a brochure for a Mandarin speaking community, it would vary quite differently from the Arabic speaking community. And as you can see, it's demonstrated here in this diagram. And I really think it comes down to adapting and understanding the nuances of your audience and how they think. And small changes in pictures, colors, layout can really go a long way in facilitating a sense of cultural understanding and belonging within your diverse communities. I should also note, though, that it's very important to review these said changes with community members, especially to ensure appropriateness and relevance, because one wrong picture can go the wrong way as well. So I think that's a very important factor to consider. This also kind of leads me to my next point, Steph, which is about dissemination strategies. With technology ever advancing, the options for communicating with our audiences has varied greatly. And at times, admittedly, it can feel a bit overwhelming, I would say so myself. A philosophy that we've always had at Polaron is that you don't know what works till you give it a try. And written translations have always been held in high regard and are usually the go-to method. However, there are always more creative ways to present the same information. I find that maybe you could hold an information session and have an interpreter present might actually assist with engagement a lot more. You could have in-language podcasts to help people access information in their day-to-day lives. I know from personal experience that when information is presented in a more engaging and easily accessible way, I'm more likely to pay attention to it. So it's sort of the same sort of thinking when you're thinking about your next project. To be honest, the opportunities are quite endless, and you'd be surprised at how fast a new strategy can gain traction. Similar to what Mark has said before, video consumption is becoming increasingly popular. So that might be your new method of communication. And I've also noticed that a lot more people are getting their information, so vital news, vital information, COVID safety guidelines, whatnot, all through social media. And that's becoming an increasingly popular place for people to go to when it comes to this sort of stuff. So I think it's just really important to try a lot of different methods, see which works for you, and then sort of, develop that further and see how it works. This also leads to my next point about accessibility. We find that one of the biggest challenges when accessing information is not language barriers, literacy levels, or even the internet, but the logic in which way the information is presented. It's vital to consider the entire user journey when developing engaging resources, I think. And whilst it's wonderful to have key documents translated, I think it's also important to think about whether those resources are easily accessible by people. As nice as it is to have everything translated and on your website, are people accessing your website? Do people know where your website is? It doesn't make sense the way that people are expected to reach out to you. So I think that's a really important factor that's sort of underrated sometimes when we consider communication strategies. And another factor I think is really important as well is intersectionality. I think for everyone, they have their own unique experiences and unique engagement strategies, and factors such as socioeconomic status, education level, and trauma all impact the way in which people engage and the level to which people are comfortable engaging in. And I think it's up to us to sort of provide a safe, accessible space in which people feel comfortable reaching out and speaking about what's important to them. So that's just to wrap up some of the ideas that I had and what I think is important in order to make a culturally relevant and engaging resource. I would just like to hand over to Eva now, who's going to be handling the Q&A portion of our event.
Thank you, Hasara. So before we move on to the Q&A, I think there's some really important takeaways from what Marcus and Hasara covered. So I just wanted to give it a quick summary. Before engaging Erica and Sadia, who have a lot to say about this topic, because they are both on the ground, kind of grassroots people. That's how I know them. But I think those of you that are watching that have in your position description communication with multicultural audiences, it's no longer good enough to translate and put it on a website. Really, it isn't. And some of the kind of old school methods still work. So for example, Hasara, where she lives, she was telling me that the local communities were accessing libraries, and with COVID, of course, they weren't able to. So a lot of information that would normally be accessed by people going to the library were not accessible. And I guess, you know, when you talk about engaging people, it's not that they're not engaging with you, you're not engaging with them. I think it's a really important point to make. If you're working for a local council or any other organization, and if communication is your job, you know, we kind of need to put that concept on its head and say, well, look, you know, communities are out there. They do want to have the information that you have, but probably you're not doing a good job at presenting it or thinking about a bit more strategically about, you know, how they want that information to be shown. So once upon a time, before I set up Polaron, I worked for a local council. I won't name it, but, you know, you can find it in my LinkedIn if you really want to. And at the time that I worked there, this was for the Aged and Disability Department. I was in charge of managing translation from, you know, from the council's end. And we were producing at the time, you know, of course, everything was on paper, internet existed, but it wasn't yet so common. So one of the things we did is translate, I think we had 5 languages, Russian, Polish, probably Yiddish, and Greek, maybe Italian. We went to that local council's website, and guess what? There's nothing translated, not one thing. And the newsletter is called Diversity. So my message to everybody that's watching, if you're going to talk diversity, do diversity. I don't, you know, like, I'm so disappointed, and I didn't realize that they've done this because we put so much work into actually communicating with the local audiences. And, you know, we're not all white and English speaking around here where I live. So it's just a bit, you know, disappointing to see that, that, you know, we talk the talk, but we don't walk it necessarily. All right, so we've got a question or comment from Dorothy, who's saying the humble interpreter can't really tell the agency that it's employing them how to disseminate the information. Well, I think Erica and Sadia might be able to give us some ideas of how to, I guess, empower the interpreter, humble interpreter, as Dorothy has put it. But one of the things, just going back to my story about the local council, at some point, maybe about 10 years ago, and speaking of interpreters, and Dorothy's just reminded me of that, is that in the newsletter, they put a very short sentence that was translated into those 5 or 6 languages that said something like, if you want this newsletter interpreted, call the interpreter service. Okay, so think about this. So I am the, you know, local resident. I've got the newsletter, and I'm going to ring TIS, which is the translating and interpreting service, to get an interpreter to translate what I'm holding in my hand, right? So apart from it being illogical, it's just also disrespectful. But that's, you know, I'll finish with my rant and officially welcome Sadia and Erica to our webinar. And I'll start with you, Erica, because I know that OZIT, and you're president of that organization, has recently, or you've been working for a while on, I guess, guidelines to people that work in translation on how to do it well. Tell us more.
Yes, so OZIT saw a gap in terms of community translations. We needed a best practice guide, and this came to the surface with the pandemic. I think that obviously Australia is a multicultural, multilingual country, and we've been like that for thousands of years. But I think the pandemic brought to the surface the need to communicate very important and vital health messaging to a very broad spectrum of the population. So the media, there was media attention, organizations started maybe paying a bit more attention to multilingual communications, and OZIT as the peak professional association or body which promotes professionalism of translating and interpreting, saw there was a gap when it comes to translations because there's not a structure. We realize also many services, government departments didn't know very well how to engage with the translation process in a way that was holistic. So translating is not just getting something in English and translating it into the other language. There's been that feeling for many years, so that misconception that anyone who can speak 2 languages can translate. Translation is much more than that. I hold a bachelor's degree in translation, a master's degree, and then I went on to do a PhD, and I'm still learning every day. So translation is a fully profession. And so it requires also expertise, as you would do if you are building a bridge. You need fully qualified engineers and you need a whole system to do it properly. So with translating and interpreting, it's the same. So we realized that, translation were produced, but sometimes there were critical errors in accuracy, in style, and in some cases, the messages, despite they might be grammatically well written, they were not capturing the target audience, because every translation has to be produced with an aim, a communication aim, and sometimes that communication aim was not being fulfilled. So we put a working group together, which comprised of very experienced translators, and then we also engaged other organizations to provide us feedback, and Polaron was one of them. So basically, these community translation protocols establish a best practice guide to the commissioning of not just translation, but for the diffusion of public health messaging and messaging in general for multicultural communities. So in our view, quality is a shared responsibility. So you cannot just blame the translator for doing a bad job. Sometimes that's the case, but on many occasions, it starts from the organization which produces the message. So as I said, in a translation process, you've got many agents and stakeholders, and each one of them is responsible for quality. So that's why if you want to communicate with your multilingual, multicultural audiences, my recommendation would be follow those protocols, because they provide a very structured, step-by-step process on what to do and how to do things well.
Erica, you knew that I was going to be asking difficult questions, didn't you?
Of course.
So my question is this, and I'm all for that protocol, and we've been working in this context for many years, because I'm also concerned about the quality of translation and what goes to the community. And I'll get Sadia to tell us more about that, because she's today a community representative. What I was going to say about that is, do we really think that governments will use this system, given that they can't even comply with their own language policies?
Well, that's a very good question. Sometimes I do get very frustrated, because we can do so much. Obviously, there has to be goodwill from, as I said, all the parties. And to me, obviously, in this translation process, language service providers play a critical role, and play the critical role as providers of the product, but also as educators of the clients or all those government departments. Sometimes, obviously, there are other factors that also affect the process, like procurement, tenders, etc. But what I want to really do through these protocols is also raise awareness that quality matters. And depending on what that translation, what that message is going to be in the target language, that will also measure the level of success to engage your audiences. If you produce a translation which is mediocre, which doesn't read well for those people, you go and you're reading a message and you go, so you basically lose trust. There was one of the COVID translations, and I was reading the Spanish feed that came in my Facebook, and they used the word visitor, like, as you would say, alien in Spanish. Do not allow visitors in your home, but the word they chose for Spanish was like aliens. So I was reading it, and then I could see all the comments from the community saying, oh, we've got a new language now, Spanglish, and ha, ha, ha. So, and it was sad, although it was obviously funny to some extent, but I thought, like, this is really sad. Because, governments are spending loads of money in getting these translations done. So there's a link missing there. And that's where I said that everyone is responsible for quality, because governments need to be very careful on who they engage to do their translations. And I know pricing, money, it's important, but also think about quality.
But some of the things, and I think to Hayley's point just before about a good example of where that's been successful, we'll cover that in a moment. But I think some of the things Marcus and Hasara also covered was use your money wisely, right? What is the point of translating everything for everybody when people, in some communities cannot read, or, we all are not coping well anymore with the volume of information coming at us. So you do need to be strategic in what you translate. And, some of the slides showed you that people maximum online can last for 2 minutes because we have attention spans of ants. But Sadia, you've seen a fair few bad translations out there, no? Am I right?
God, yes. Thank you so much, Eva and Polaron, for always having me and also having this quality information sessions for the community. And well said, Erica, the way you have mentioned about the translation quality. It does matter. And it's not about, as you said, that it's not about the translation only. It's about the community and the messaging. And I do have had this experience, horrible translations. It's not about just the translated resources or materials. It's about the dialect and about the appropriateness of that of those resources, whether our audience is it relevant to them, like the way you mentioned about having aliens. This was a very horrible experience with us being a swimming pool being pronounced and spelled differently in different dialects within the same language. So we have to understand the depth of what languages we're talking about and what are the sub languages or the dialects of that particular community or ethnic group or the audience that we have we are targeting. So it is very much important to invest and investigate as to how wisely we should utilize our resources, our money, and the time also. People are time poor. The organizations like the government is time poor. We have to be very, very wise, choose wisely as to who these services, who should be our service provider, who should be the interpreter, whether or not the way we have entitled that language that really belongs to that community or not, because we are talking about the message. It's not about, what's been translated or who is the interpreter. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think these are excellent points. We do have a question from Lauren, which I'm going to throw at Marcus actually, because it's very pertinent to what he does. So Eric has already mentioned that, it's everybody's responsibility to get translation right. But there are so many players, including, translators, interpreters, project managers, clients, that put this pressure on, cheaper, faster, and all of that. Marcus, how do we ensure, or how do we know that something is of good quality if we don't speak the language? What are some of the things that clients could do if they don't know?
Thanks, Eva. So I think there's 2 things to notice that first. First of all, when you engage a language service provider, they will be able and they should be able to have good translators, and they should be able to follow protocols, which is you have the material translated and you have the material checked by a second translator, and then if you're working with Polaron, sometimes you can even have your translation checked a 3rd time by a member of the community organization. But if you don't speak the language, things that you're going to be looking at, if you have, let's say you have a 2-page resource of COVID information, you have to check if, all of the words that are in English, telephone numbers, names, addresses, have we copied this information across to the other language correctly? Because I've seen in the past when I worked as a translator and when I worked as a proofreader, I've seen many translators who, ended up copying the information that is in English, addresses and names wrong. So the way that you can check is you can have a look at the formatting, and if the English words that you see in the translated material, if they are correct or not. But I would say that it's also the organization that you're working with. They also should be able to, they also play a role in making sure that that material is of good quality by having that material go through the whole process. You translate, you go through a second proofreader that is also a translator. And then in our case, we also do it through a community checker as well, a 3rd time. So yeah, I think that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. And in fact, if you're translating into several languages, they should more or less all look the same. So, without speaking the language, if you look at things like phone numbers, that's Marcus already mentioned, spacing, you know, simple things that you can visually see that aren't quite right, or wrong font or whatever it is, that can you know, give you a bit of a concern whether something's good or not. But you should go back to your language service provider and ask questions. Things like, who are your translators? Are they NAATI certified? Are they members of OSIT? Erica's nodding her head because we've been advocating that for many years, and yet sometimes clients do not know who the translators are. I sometimes feel like the translator's name should be on the translation, so that you can actually, you know, put a bit more transparency into the system. But Erica, if people wanted to find the protocol that OSIT has developed, where can they go? I mean, we'll post them later, but maybe you can talk us through that a bit.
Yes, well, we are in the final stages of putting all the feedback together. So keep tuned. Eva, what I'll do is send it to you, because you were also one of our contributors. So you can actually disseminate it widely among all the stakeholders, people attending today, and they'll be ready very, very soon. The other thing I wanted to say is also, of course, if you don't know the language, you cannot check, but that's where your language service provider plays a pivotal role. They're translators and they're translators. I'm also an academic and an educator. So it's true that sometimes language service providers or agents, it might say, oh, we do engage NAATI certified translators, but you go, for example, to the NAATI directory, Chinese, Spanish, which are two very popular languages, Arabic. You know, you kick a stone and you get 100 translators. Some people just get them randomly. It also depends on how much translators are getting paid. I've got really good colleagues who are senior, who hold tertiary qualifications, are members of the professional association, and they won't work with some very large agencies, for example, because they pay them peanuts. So obviously these jobs will go to the less qualified and people who might not be so senior because they are not interested in the rates they're being offered. So I would say, if you're going to engage a language service provider, ask questions. Ask them, who are, as Eva said, who are your translators? What are the qualifications of those translators? In Australia, there are different ways to enter the profession as translator. If you want to become a translator and interpreter, for some languages, we've got tertiary education. So ask that people in the most popular languages have university credentials or solid experience in the field and really good reputation, etc. So those are questions that your language service provider should be able to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, there's no such thing as pressing a button and, you know, you receive a translation in your inbox, you know, the next minute. Technology is there to support us, but it doesn't quite yet work. Sadia, I was going to ask you, because you have the experience of the community that sometimes gets tapped into, not just to advise language service providers or governments about what to translate, but how to disseminate that information, because that's maybe that's even more important, you know, and that's why we call this session, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. What are you finding out there in the community?
I think our dissemination of the messaging is quite critical, and it's crucial, and it's very important to have, you know, have that attention and have that, you know, proper strategic or logistics behind as to how we, you know, who is our target audience, who do we want to talk about. As you know, Erica mentioned that it is important to ask those questions, but there are some challenges in terms of emerging communities, especially languages that are dialects. That's very critical, and dissemination of this messaging in terms of you know, translated materials has always been a challenge for, you know, for community leaders, for organizations of any level. So it is very important to have that you know, proper channel of co-designing engagement methods coming back from within the communities, and also recognizing and acknowledging that different groups engage best in different ways. So it does, you know, it's not one size fit all. We have to be really flexible in terms of understanding, as Hasara mentioned, about the level of literacy, you know, level of engagement, about the language, about, you know, where the community group is coming from, the trauma, everything else, everything that we have to consider when it comes to dissemination of messaging. So yes, engagement is, it's about everything. Engagement is about everything.
And since you mentioned Hasara by name, I'm going to ask a question now. So Hasara, what would be, because you work with clients that come to you and they already have an idea about who they want to communicate to, but sometimes not, right? Sometimes they might not know the language, or they might not know even, like they might have a message, but they don't know what to do with it or how to disseminate it, how much it's going to cost. Like, what are some of the things, 3 things that you could advise for some, to someone, tell someone who hasn't done translation or has had very little to do with the translation process?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing you could do is kind of reach out to your language service provider. We actually do provide a lot more information than you may realize. It's not just the process of translating an existing resource. We have a whole wealth of knowledge that you can sort of tap into. Like, I know myself, I've asked Eva many questions because she's just so experienced when it comes to engaging with people. And I think sometimes when clients come to us, they don't realize how much we can help them. So with that said, we do offer services such as co-design, where we can work with you from the very beginning to help you design your resource and figure out which dissemination strategies work best. Similarly, you could also reach out to community leaders such as Sadia, or to even Erica as well, people who are quite knowledgeable in different areas of who you're trying to reach. So if you wanted to know how the community is going to respond to something, it'd be best to reach out to the community directly. If you want to know if your resource is of quality and if it's suitable for translation, then it's appropriate to reach out to someone like Erica. Truthfully, there's also a lot of webinars, information sessions, workshops. There's like a wealth of knowledge, all free to access as well, that I think people should really be tapping into. But lastly, even for us, we kind of consider ourselves advisors as well to a certain degree. So I'd really encourage everyone just to ask all the important questions, even if you think it's not relevant, it might be. And yeah, that's what my biggest advice would be, just to really push everyone to their boundaries and see what information you can get before you proceed with something.
Right, and we will get to our questions in the chat box in a moment, but I wanted to ask you, Erica, this, because we did, in the fringes of what we're talking about, mention cost and, the pressure of, interpreters and translators getting paid less, and, we live in a global world. But what is the cost of not doing it right?
Yes, well, so when I was writing my PhD, it's funny that, you have to do a fast literature review. So I embarked in looking into, cases or the cost of actually not engaging professionals, getting your family members to do it instead, or your neighbor. And obviously most of the case and information I gathered came from the States, but we had people who were operated on different limbs. There was this, I remember this case where a Portuguese-speaking client was in a hospital in New York and they thought he had a heart attack. So they performed all these tests that, in a private hospital system like the US ended up costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, it happened that the person was diabetic, and a simple question by an interpreter would have costed them, I don't know, $120 to engage an interpreter. Instead, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars because they had to go through trial and error. So you are also exposing yourself to litigation. So the cost of engaging non-professionals can be very expensive. Plus, you also have the lack of trust. The lack of trust, you can lose an entire community, the trust of an entire sector of the population for getting it wrong. So I would be very careful. So because in the long run, I think it's a good investment. Yeah, and it's like anything else, like things well done are well done and they will last.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. And Sadia, with what Erica just said, can you tell us maybe, or give us some examples of good dissemination strategies that you've seen out there? You do work for the city of Casey, which is one of the most diverse areas of Australia, I think, nowadays. What have you seen out there that you could share with us today?
Well, with the entire world turnover after 2020 and this pandemic, I think online, digital world has taken over a lot of resources and platform. It's the best portal at the moment, engaging with the wider community. However, I would say that your flexibility depends on depends on what sort of focus group you're looking into. based on the diversity of your local government or LGA where you're living, you should be very aware of, what the people are coming from, or what is the level of their understanding in terms of literacy and in terms of language. So the first thing is to acknowledge and recognize, the level of engagement and level of literacy of that focus group. And then I think we need a proper cultural toolkit for the translation and interpretation. When I say toolkit, it means that, what sort of the questions like who, when, why, how, what language services, how much time, and what sort of level of engagement, whether that should be a webinar, that should be a social media, that is that going to be a social media tile, or if that is going to be a live session, if that is a YouTube, or if there is one of the, undermined platform that has been recently we have started utilizing is that the notice boards. We have recognized that people have started reading notice boards when they come for shopping, and also Facebook, TikTok. People are time poor these days, so we try to be as as effective as possible to get to the level of the community. And it is very, very much important. It's not about your level of understanding, it's about the community's level of understanding. We have to get down to community's level to understand them, where they've come from, and what sort of support they need in terms of messaging and communication. And I would say having that co-design members from within the community has worked really well for us, like the task force groups and community leaders, religious leaders, faith leaders, members of recognized service providers. With all those expertise, we have been able to co-design resources, and we have been able to acknowledge the dialects. We have been able to educate ourselves that it is not necessary that one language that we know has the same dialect or has the same spelling, has the same meaning. It has got diverse range of aspects that we should be really mindful, and it comes down to the level of culture, tradition, and being respectfully utilizing those words as well. Sometimes there are terms that are very that has got one meaning in one language, but we should be really mindful if that is going to be a respectful way of using that term or that word in another specific dialect. So these are all the sensitive areas and concerns that we should be mindful while being engaged or disseminating the messaging to the multicultural, or especially I would say culturally and linguistically diverse background people who are coming from, and emerging languages. It's very sensitive to understand that requirements and their needs. That's important.
And of course, what you're talking about, Sadia, is really hard work, isn't it?
It is.
You can't just walk into a community and say, "Hi, I've got this information. Help me." It takes a while to develop relationships that are sincere, right?
It does take a good experience and knowledge, deep understanding also of different communities and what's being sensible and what's not, what works, what doesn't work, because different groups take different level of method and understanding.
Right, and I think in communities that are particularly diverse, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and you can't get a fact sheet and think, okay, I'm going to translate it and it's going to work for everybody, because it just doesn't, for all kinds of reasons. And I think we've mentioned literacy. We assume that people have internet at home. Some people do not. So you do need to look at other ways of presenting your information so that you're engaging the community, at a genuine level where they actually get the information they need. And it doesn't need to be everything for everybody. It's more about being strategic and targeted, right?
Can I mention about the capacity building as well? So if on one hand we are talking about the engagement and communication, on the other hand, we should be talking about the accessibility and capacity building as well. For example, you mentioned about the internet accessibility and digital awareness. We did come across with the challenges that, communities that had, language challenges and had just been arrived, or just the newly arrived communities had this barrier of digital awareness, accessibility, and how we could, just cover their necessities and requirement, how we could support that in terms of, providing that digital awareness and support in terms of how they can reach out to get these resources and information, and how they can contact us for any sort of support that they may need. So capacity building is very much important as well on the other side.
Right, and it is a two-way street, I guess, empowering the communities to give you that feedback is one important thing. And again, I'm full of examples, and it's not about pointing fingers, but I have come across the other day an organization that was seeking feedback about racism. And what they've done is they've done translation of little short, I guess 20-word sentences into 6 languages, but when you clicked on it to give them feedback, it went to English. So for me, it's not just chauvinistic and disrespectful, but pretty useless, if you ask me. And I'd rather they didn't do any of it, and when I queried it or the situation, they said, well, we just don't have money. So I think somebody made a very good point in the chat about equal access, and empowering these communities that we work with to be able to give you feedback. If you really want to know, we're going to really tell you what we think. And I don't think other organizations are ready to hear what we have to say sometimes. I think that's the other issue. Erica, why should people work with professional interpreters and translators?
So basically, one of the things is because in the long term, obviously, it's better, you're going to get good results, you're going to get reliable results. Then it's also what we said, you are promoting equal access. And again, because translating and interpreting is a fully fledged profession, and you have to leave it in the hands of professionals. As I said, it's not just taking a message in A and turning it into B. A good translator knows that different people communicate in different manners, depending on the life experiences they've got, depending on their background, where they grew up, the migration journey. All that has an impact on the way we see the world and therefore communicate. So if you get someone who has never been to a translation theory class, and yes, they might translate this into this in a grammatically correct manner, but you might be missing the point of the message completely. So again, you need people who know what they're talking about, who know their profession, who know their basically the theoretical, contextual, and everything that surrounds a profession. Would we ever go to a doctor who hasn't gone to a faculty of medicine? Or would you go and get yourself represented by a lawyer who hasn't gone to law school? Well, with translating and interpreting is a bit the same. And I know that not everybody's got the opportunity to go to university because, as Sadia very well said, there are new and emerging languages and there's no capacity to train all of them. As I said, I also wear this academic hat, and at our MIT University, where I come from, we've been working really hard to also include in the curriculum new and emerging languages, especially through my colleagues in the vocational education sector. And it's never easy because obviously you need to build capacity as well. But, and also from OSIT, I think professional development courses are also important because they fill in an important gap there. So yeah, basically get professionals, because there'll be people who know what they're doing basically. Or if they do not have tertiary qualifications or university vocational education training, at least make sure they are professionals who have tons of experience, who have might be self-taught, but at least people who know about the subject matter. As I said, you wouldn't get a lawyer, a doctor, who haven't been to a faculty. And still, translators and interpreters work in the fields of law and medicine, and sometimes, people think that anyone can do the job, but that's not the case.
But of course, our industry is a very complex picture, because you've already mentioned the professional association you are president of, the training institution, the industry. It is, if anyone's listening to this that has a need for translation, we all 5 of us said, ask questions, find out who you're working with. I think you should ask for people's CVs. You know, are they really qualified in the language that they're going to be translating? Who's your project manager? What's the quality control or management system that the organization that you're working with has? What are the language policies of your own organizations? Are there any? What's the budget? You know, it's such a complex conversation. So like I said earlier, unfortunately, fortunately, it does require a lot of engagement, asking questions, but then you end up with something that not only you can be proud of, but actually does the job. Yeah, because I hope that Sadia will confirm this here, that communities don't, you know, they don't want to read fancy brochures. They just want to know who, when, how much, where, basic stuff, right? So that they can actually access services, right, Sadia?
That's right. I would definitely, you've spot on, Eva. Let's take an example of one project, for example. Let's talk about COVID, which is very, very relevant at this point. If we're talking about one single message, we'll be taking different approaches, and depending on the audience and depending on the target group we are trying to communicate with, we'll take different approaches. For example, whether this group is going to understand videos, so we'll create some videos that is like more of a visual and less audio. We might also create on animations that has got more animated and translated and recorded voice over that. Other thing that we can talk about is like we might print out some very plain or simple English flyers that has got more images and very simple, like to the point, just what the purpose of this messaging is. Social media plays a very important role. Just one post, one tile with an image. That's it. And also DART messaging is very important. By DART messaging, I mean that, targeting different demographics, because we must acknowledge the importance of demographics as well, by, like as Hassara mentioned about the socioeconomic status, accessibility. So it is important to understand where these populations are located. DART messaging is very much important, is sponsoring those messages so that it could go to the right people for their understanding. And that message is going to pop up to that population only. And also podcasting, radio, simple messaging, simple, just very, very concise, very, very precise TikTok video. That could work as a fun way. Like people have been, drained with all those messages. So we need something creative, thinking out of the box, thinking how we can engage them, and especially the age group. What age group are we targeting? If it is about the seniors group, are we really making our material related to them? If it is about middle-aged, if it is about women, it's about children, it's about men, is it about our LGBTIQ plus community? What sort of community we are talking about? So all those sensitive, all those important aspects are really important. If I have to choose a service provider, I will definitely raise these questions, and I would definitely provide as much information as possible to just get that quality and quality material, and also respecting my time as well as others. So this is something that I will definitely consider before I get engaged and have that final material.
Yeah, look, we're getting some really interesting comments and questions in the chat, so I'll move on to that. But I will just say that everything we spoke about is education. Like if I can summarize it in one word, because in the mainstream, when we talk about a topic, whether it's dementia, mental health, or cancer, whatever it is, there are campaigns, there are money thrown at the media and education, generally speaking. But for some communities, it takes years before those messages go through to them, because no one's bothered to translate, because, I don't know, it's a small Tibetan community or whatever it is, right? And they are exposed to either old messaging or nothing at all. We expect them to behave in a certain way, but we haven't told them what that expectation might be. So I think there's another angle of whenever the industry gets involved in translation work, whether, I don't know if we can call ourselves industry, but we kind of are, we wear different hats. It's also about thinking of that person at the other end of that translation. What are they going to read? What are they going to do with that information? Are they going to put it up on in a frame on a wall? Probably not. They want to do something with it. And I think we all, including clients who are hopefully listening today, need to be responsible for that communication. So we've got about 5 minutes. I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone. So let me go through some questions. So the federal government spent around $8 million on the COVID Safe app, which was only translated into 4 languages. And it wasn't really translated. It was just linked to translated information on other websites. And look, that's really poor practice. And I, again, not pointing fingers, but WorkSafe, they've got automated translation on the website. And, I'd rather they had nothing, because if you go there, you're not going to be informed. It's just a tokenistic. So that's a shame that happens. And it is actually against the government policy. So which is one bit I don't understand, but, that's me.
Can I quickly just mention a bit of a comment? I think I understand where this has come from, is because we see every second, every moment, and every day with the COVID messaging being changed, and with the restrictions and with the resolutions being changed. I think it is very hard for the government to keep up with that changes so frequently, and with all those languages and dialects consideration. That really that does make sense. However, people's concern in terms of being respectful to other languages is also understandable. So it does make sense.
Yes. And Tracy's made a very good point where she said that people reading translations shouldn't feel as if they are a second-class citizen, and that it's an afterthought. Unfortunately, translations usually, or sometimes, maybe I shouldn't be so harsh, as an afterthought to a process, to an organization, to a government. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Erica just to maybe summarize what we said, because we have run out of time. We've got 3 minutes and we've covered so much ground. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hasara. Thank you, Sadia, Marcus, and Erica. A short message, Erica, for those that are listening. What do we want people to really walk away with from today's session?
So basically, I would say what you repeated before: get educated, engage your communities. Co-design is really important. Hear what they need, how they consume information, and what's the best avenue to communicate that information. Then engage a good language service provider, and don't hesitate interviewing them, compiling information about their translation, their pool of translators, and just having that conversation with your language service provider, because there are many language service providers, and I think that it's key to get the organization that best fits your purpose. And then obviously bear in mind that quality is a shared responsibility, and that you will be the main entity responsible for the final delivery of that product. So think carefully how you're going to do things so that your communication strategy is successful.
Beautiful. Sadia, any last words for us all?
I would say I have 2 messages for the two areas. One is for the service providers, and the other is for the service, like the clients who are looking into getting some services. So for service providers, as much as clients, important to ask those questions: that who is your target group, and understand their target groups, the audience, the demographics, the level of understanding, what sort of material they're looking for. You should be asking those questions as well, because sometimes clients forget and they just throw the material and ask the interpreters or service providers to just translate it into XYZ languages, and that's all. No, you should be asking those questions as well, just to remind them, and be mindful of utilizing that money and time in a very purposeful manner. For the clients or community groups, or as a community engagement, it is important to have that co-design steering committee to understand again and work together collaboratively to develop a resource that is relevant to that target group or to that focused group. Again, understanding the level of engagement and level of literacy, where they've come from, the level of trauma, whether they need a visual effect, they need video, they need audio, or they need something in writing. So this is something that I would be suggesting for the engaging officers, people working with different community or diverse community groups.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Sally. And because we've run out of time, I cannot ask Marcus and Hasara to speak, but I will tell you that we're going, my colleagues will be sending you some information, those that have attended. We do have a translation toolkit that can guide you through the process. And I know that we've not been able to answer some of the questions that people ask, but we will reach out to you and explore, because it is an exploration. And thank you all for wonderful questions and your engagement. I think we have nearly 50 people attending, so that's a great number. Thank you, Hasara. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Sadia. And thank you, Erica and Stephanie behind the scenes. And have a great afternoon, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.